Hello, and welcome back to the Priestess Path. Last week, I introduced a new body of work that I'm calling Remembrance Astrology. It's an approach to astrology that asks not who you are, but what your soul is trying to remember. In that first essay, I spoke about the idea that many women are not living from who they truly are. They're living from who they had to become. That somewhere along the way, adaptation became identity, protection became personality, and survival became self. Today, I want to begin exploring the archetypes themselves, and there feels like no better place to begin that than with Venus. Venus isn't necessarily the most important planet, but I increasingly believe she governs the very thing that makes remembrance possible. Desire. And that brings me to a question I've been sitting with for some time. What if Venus was never the goddess of love and beauty? Or perhaps a better question would be, what if love and beauty were only a fraction of who she was before we forgot the rest? What if Venus was not the archetype of love, but the archetype of sacred desire itself? The more time I spend with mythology, astrology, and the stories that shape our collective imagination, the more I find myself wondering what has been left, what has been lost along the way. Not because astrology is wrong, not because the myths are wrong, but because every symbolic system passes through culture, and culture leaves fingerprints. The planets are older than empires, older than religions, older than political systems, older than patriarchy. And yet the stories we tell about them are not. And nowhere do I feel this more strongly than in Venus. Modern astrology describes Venus as the planet of love, beauty, relationships, pleasure, attraction, values, and money. All of that is true. And yet I increasingly find myself feeling that these interpretations describe the surface of Venus rather than her depths. The Venus I encounter in mythology is not passive. She's not agreeable. She's not particularly concerned with being good. And she's certainly not spending her time worrying about whether she's too much. She desires. She chooses. She pursues. She creates. She refuses to apologize for her own existence. And the more I sit with her stories, the more I wonder whether Venus has been softened by history. The goddess became the muse. The creator became the beauty. The sovereign became the beloved. The woman who desired became the woman who was desired. Something vital was lost in that transformation. Aphrodite was never simply beautiful, she was dangerous. Not because she carried weapons and not because she sought power in the traditional sense, but because she embodied desire. And desire has always been difficult to control. The moment a woman remembers what she wants, she becomes harder to manage. She can no longer be told what she should want. She can no longer be defined solely by what she gives. And she can no longer be reduced to service, sacrifice, accommodation, or performance. She becomes sovereign. And perhaps that's why I've chosen Venus as the first archetype of Remembrance Astrology. Because before we can remember who we are, we must remember what we truly want. Not what culture told us to want. Not what would make us acceptable. Not what would make us successful. Not what would make us fit in. But what our soul genuinely longs for. The ancient myths tell us that Venus was born from the sea. She emerged from a violent cosmic upheaval, from the overthrow of a tyrannical order, from the meeting of sky and water. She came ashore upon a shell, with flowers blooming beneath her feet. Before she was lover, she was creation. Before she was beauty, she was emergence. Before she was relationship, she was life force. This is not the story of a decorative goddess. It is the story of a primordial one. And yet, over time, much of her complexity seems to have been stripped away. What fascinates me most is that Venus is not perfect. She's not the saintly woman. She's not the endlessly accommodating woman. She's not the impossible ideal. She's flawed. She becomes jealous. She manipulates. She pursues pleasure. She follows desire. She makes mistakes. She creates chaos. She contains contradiction, and perhaps that is precisely why she matters. Because the patriarchy does not only diminish women by making them weak, sometimes it diminishes women by making them impossible. The perfect woman, the beautiful woman, the endlessly nurturing woman, the agreeable woman, the selfless woman, the woman elevated onto a pedestal. And yet the woman on the pedestal is no freer than the woman beneath it. Both are trapped by expectation. Venus refuses that trap. She refuses perfection. She insists on wholeness. And that distinction feels incredibly important because Remembrance Astrology is not interested in helping us become perfect. It is interested in helping us become whole. It is interested in helping us recover the parts of ourselves that were pushed into shadow because they were inconvenient, messy, uncomfortable, or unacceptable. The parts that still carry wisdom, the parts that still carry truth, the parts that are waiting to be remembered. Through the lens of Remembrance Astrology, Venus is not merely the archetype of relationship. She is the archetype of sacred desire. She reveals what we value, what we cherish, what we devote ourselves to, what awakens our aliveness, and perhaps most importantly, what we have forgotten how to want. The descent of Venus asks, what was I taught to value? What desires became unsafe? What parts of myself did I abandon in order to belong? The revelation of Venus asks, what does my soul actually long for? What have I mistaken for desire because it was expected of me? And what forgotten part of myself is trying to return? The return of Venus asks, how do I build a life around what I've remembered? How do I honour desire as wisdom rather than weakness? How do I reclaim the sovereign woman beneath the conditioning? That is the Venus we're being invited to rediscover, not the sanitized, acceptable goddess, but the original one. The one who reminds us that desire was never separate from spirituality. It was one of its oldest languages. And perhaps that's where Remembrance Astrology begins, with a single question. What part of the soul is trying to remember itself through this archetype? Thank you for walking this path with me. Each Sunday, in the liminal space between one week and the next, the Priestess Path invites you to pause, reflect, and remember.